everyone, Matthew Saunders again here for another virtual author reading. Today I'm going to be reading again from book 2 of my Daughters of Shadow and Blood trilogy, Elena. And this time I'm going to be reading from chapter 5, which is the first time we meet her in the past. Again, if you haven't read book 1, there's no spoilers involved in this, but if you haven't read book 1, you really should get on that. So anyway, again, Elena is an Albanian peasant living in the 17th century, 1600s, and this is what her life was like prior to her meeting Dracula. Gračanica, Kosovo, the 14th of September, 1689, old style. John stopped again and sat down hard on the ground. I'm sorry, Elena. I just need to rest for a few minutes. Elena struggled to mask her exasperation. Please, John, it's going to be dark soon. We need to hurry. It wasn't his fault, Elena knew. It had been a hard journey for him. Though they had walked only a few miles, it had taken them all day. Really, what frustrated her was that the old imam said he couldn't help John anymore. The boy sat down on the side of the road, coughing and wheezing, fighting to catch his breath. No one, it seemed, could help him. Not the priest in the white robes who sometimes visited their house to give them communion. Not the priest in the black robes at the monastery nearby. Not the old gypsy woman who had camped by the river the previous summer. And not an ancient king whose remains rested in a church 2 days away by horse. And her brother was only getting worse. Please, John, she said again, please try. We don't have much further to go. You can rest all you need when we get home. Reluctantly he stood, and they continued on their way as quickly as John could walk. The farmhouse rested in a small hollow near the edge of a plain. Its thatched roof finally came into sight just as the orange sun touched the rolling pasture land behind it. When Elena and John entered the house, their mother was sitting by the fire mending clothes, while their sister Irina helped. Slumped in a chair by the table, the remains of his dinner still in front of him, their father had already passed out and was snoring. Their mother glanced up only briefly as the two of them stepped through the door before she returned to her mending. John gave Elena a weary smile and went to his bed in the other room. Elena stood for a moment watching her mother work by the light of the fire. Its flickering glow emphasized the hard creases in her face. The imam can't do anything more for John, Elena said. Her mother didn't respond. He said he had tried every remedy known to him to help John breathe better and to keep them from coughing. There's nothing left for him to try. He said God didn't create any disease for which he didn't also create a cure, but sometimes it's God's will for the cure not to be found. The silence was broken only by the crackling of the fire and her father's snoring. Her mother's hands nimbly worked the needle and thread to fix a hole in a pair of her trousers. Elena wanted to cry, but she couldn't, not there, not in front of them. Men didn't cry. She went back outside. The moon had risen, bathing the countryside in its silver-blue glow. She walked around to the back of the house under the pretense of checking to make sure the chicken coop was secure. Her sister had a habit of leaving it unlatched, making the chickens easy prey for any fox that managed to squeeze under the fence. Once she made sure the coop was shut properly, she walked out to the new barn just a few yards from the house, a barn she herself had helped to build. The building, made of logs and stones, was meant to house the 2 sheep and the 2 goats she had worked so hard to buy. They were returning from the herdsmen from the summer pastures in a few weeks. The barn was small, but she was proud of it. Whenever she looked down at the baggy men's clothes she wore or felt her closely cropped hair, however, she was forced to admit to herself the sacrifice it had taken to achieve what she had. Neither of her parents had forgiven her for becoming a sworn virgin, denouncing her life as a woman to live as a man, but she had done it to save her brother and sister. She opened the door to the barn and went inside. There she sat in the fresh hay and began to sob. There were still days when she questioned whether she had made the right decision. She remembered the night vividly, though more than a year had passed. She sat in her bed after everyone else was asleep, the knife poised in her hands. She hesitated just for a second, thinking somehow there might be another way, but she knew there wasn't. She cut her hair until it was as short as her brother's and took some of his clothes. Then she made the oath to herself that she would be a virgin for the rest of her life. Her father had arranged for her to marry George, the son of Burham Bay, a wealthy neighbor. She would have had to go live with his family, and she couldn't allow that. She couldn't leave John and Irina in the house by themselves, especially not Irina, as she grew older, but refusing George outright would have dishonored his family and started another blood feud. Only by becoming a sworn virgin was she able to get out of the marriage. When she revealed to her parents what she had done, her father screamed at her, called her names, and threatened her. Do you realize what you've done? Burham Bay is a wealthy man. You've thrown away your future. You've thrown away our future. I'll kill you. That day, though, Elena did something she had never done before. She stood her ground. Perhaps it was the clothes. Won't do a thing. Your hands shake so much you can't point a gun straight anymore. And I haven't thrown away our future. You have. You're a coward and a drunkard. You won't leave the house to work, and you forced 3 women and a sickly boy to do everything for you. She regretted what she said as soon as the words left her lips, but only because of the hurt look on John's face. Her father's mouth twisted into a snarl. You'll pay for that remark, girl. Elena shook her head. I'm no longer a girl, and you're too drunk to stand without holding on to something, much less do anything to hurt me. You said that once we moved down from the mountains, our lives would be better. You said that even though you were still in the blood, that you would no longer have to hide. No one would travel this far to take revenge. But you lied. You're still hiding, and we're all slowly dying. If you won't be the man of the house, then I will. Her father lunged at her. She dodged him easily, but he lost his balance and crashed to the floor. Her mother rushed to his side to help him up. He hadn't tried to touch her since, but he was certainly drunk more of the time. Her mother stopped speaking to her that day. Even so, she worked hard. As a man, she could do business with the other farmers in the valley. She could go into town, sell their surplus crops, and buy what they needed. Because of her, they were not going hungry. The one thing she couldn't do, though, was save her brother. She didn't know how long she had been sitting there when she heard the crash coming from the direction of the house. She smelled smoke and sprinted from the barn. By the time she reached the front of the house, flames were already leaping from every window. She called for her brother and sister. Her first thought was that the blood feud had found them. Through the haze and the smoke, her father came running towards her, yelling for her to get away from their house. Where's John? She asked. Where's Irina? He grabbed her by the arm. This way, we have to get to the neighbors as fast as we can. We won't be safe until we do. She tried to yank her arm free, but her father gripped her tighter and pulled her away from the house. What are you doing? Didn't you hear me? We have to get away, now. Where are John and Irina? You stupid girl, we are going to get us killed. Let's go. They were on him a second later, 2 of them. Not men from the rival clan, but savage monsters. They ripped at her father's flesh with their teeth, their eyes burning with an unnatural red glow that was more than the mere reflection of the fire. She ran, but not towards the neighbor's farm. As fast as her feet would carry her, she sprinted towards the burning house. She wouldn't leave without knowing John and Irina were safe. She got as near to the inferno as she could. The 2 monsters, when they were done with her father, turned their attention towards her, that they seemed concerned with staying a good distance away from the fire. Hands and mouth smeared in blood, they growled and paced like hungry wolves. She found herself trapped with a fire at her back and no way to get past the 2 monsters. Elena's gaze darted as she searched for any small opening that might save her. Her father was right. She was an idiot. John and Irina were gone. If they hadn't escaped the house before the fire started, they couldn't have made it out alive. As if to punctuate Elena's despair, the roof of the house collapsed with a roar, sending flames high up into the night and embers raining down. Smoke obscured her vision, though footfalls on the dry leaves told her the monsters still hovered nearby. Her throat burned. She held her arm to her mouth and nose, but it did little good. An ember landed on her sleeve and smoldered, threatening to set her coat on fire. She flung it away, only to see something in the grass glint off its orange light. She stood to retrieve the object and discovered it was the silver coin John kept for good luck. Thinking of the monsters, words came to Elena. Lugat, Kukuti, boogeymen from the stories her mother told her when she was a child, creatures of the night that fed on the blood of the innocent. Though in the stories, the innocent always had ways to fight back. The smoke had thickened to the point Elena could no longer see the monsters. She hoped they could no longer see her. She clutched the silver coin in her fist and darted toward the stream at the thicket of trees that separated her family's farm from the neighbor's land. She didn't hear the monsters behind her as she scrambled through the underbrush, and had almost convinced herself she could make it when she tripped and fell. The coin flew from her hand. She fumbled for it in the blackness, but it was too dark to see where it went. As she struggled to her feet, fingers clamped around her wrist. She inhaled to scream, but a hand covered her mouth. She thrashed around until a familiar voice whispered in her ear. "Stop it, Elena," John said, "or you'll get us both killed." Her brother pulled her into the shadow of a nearby tree. She helped him up into its branches and then climbed up herself. There they stayed for most of the night in complete silence, arms wrapped around one another for warmth, watching and waiting. But the things never came back. When the sky began to lighten in the east, Elena gathered up enough courage to speak, though she was still afraid to do so above a whisper. "What happened, John? Where are Rena and Mother?" John didn't answer right away, and when he did, he didn't look at her. "Gone." Elena fought the tremor in her lower lip. "What happened? What were those things?" John shook his head. "I don't know. I heard them when they came to the door. They said they were travelers and had gotten lost. They were both very charming, actually. Mother invited them in, but once they were inside, I heard Mother and Rena both scream. Father ran into the room. He grabbed me and practically tossed me through the window. He told me to run to the neighbor's house and not look back. I asked where you were. He said you were probably dead." John started coughing. He coughed so much that he spat up a tiny bit of blood. Elena had to get him somewhere to rest. "I did as I was told," John continued, "except that I looked back once. I heard a crash, and I glanced over my shoulder to see the fire already spreading. I ran into the woods, but I had to stop because I couldn't breathe." The sky continued to grow lighter, though the shadows still loomed around them. Elena hopped down from the tree and motioned for John to do the same. "Where are we going?" he asked. "To the monastery," Elena replied, as she helped him down again. "Down again? They said they couldn't help me." "You're going to stay there this time, John. You need to be cared for." "Why? What are you going to do? Why can't you care for me?" "I'm going to come back to the farm. I don't want to be apart from you. It's only for a little while, John, I promise. Please do this for me." John nodded. She helped him along, clearing the brush as best she could as they made their way through the forest, and when it was too thick, she helped him to climb over the brambles and thorns. Elena wasn't as sure as she made herself sound. She was hungry. She was tired. All she wanted was to lie down on the ground in the damp bed of leaves and sleep, forgetting the night had ever happened. But she continued to put one foot in front of the other because she didn't know how to do anything else. The sky had turned the pale blue of morning by the time they reached the clearing where the monastery stood. Though she had visited it before, she was always awed by the grandness of it compared to their tiny house. The sun rising behind the domes gave the building a magical glow. Elena stepped into the clearing and turned to John. She watched in horror as a hand reached out of the shadows and grabbed her brother. Elena screamed and rushed toward him, but the hand dragged him back into the woods. John reached for her, his eyes wide with terror as another hand covered his mouth. The creature's face appeared, eyes burning like hellfire and mouth filled with razor-sharp fangs. It sunk its teeth into John's neck, and deep red blood spurted over them both. They vanished into the shadows just as the sun topped the monastery's highest dome. So a lot of stuff going on in that chapter. Again, you'll notice just me being a nerd, I did the date in the old style in the Julian calendar because Kosovo was still part of the Ottoman Empire at the time and hadn't adopted the Gregorian calendar yet. So that's how I dated it. If you noticed, Elena's family actually is Catholic. The majority of Albanians converted to Islam when the Ottomans came in. But really, most of them retained most of their old folk beliefs. That was what was important to them mostly. They kind of cherry-picked things from Christianity and from Islam that they liked and included that in their folk beliefs. Neither of those religions were very strong in the area. It's just that Islam provided a certain advantage to people in the Ottoman Empire. You were a second-class citizen if you were a Christian or Jewish or some other religion. So that's why a lot of conversions happened in Albania among the Albanians. The other thing that I kind of want to talk about is the whole idea of being a sworn virgin. That was an important part of this chapter, and kind of shapes a lot of Elena's personality going forward. Traditional Albanian society at the time was very patriarchal. Women couldn't own property, they couldn't do business, they were barred from most professions. They really were owned by their husbands or their fathers if they weren't married. but as kind of a safety valve to that, you had this idea of being a sworn virgin, where if a woman cut her hair short and wore men's clothes and took an oath to never get married, she was basically treated as a man and could then do all the things that a man could do. It actually had nothing to do with sexuality. There were a lot of different reasons why a woman would do this. Sometimes, if a family didn't have any sons, if there were only daughters, they would make one of the daughters become a sworn virgin so that she could inherit the property when her parents died, and then hopefully pass it on intact to one of her nephews one day, so that kind of kept the property intact in the family. And another reason is what Elena did, is to avoid an arranged marriage. Because the decision to become a sworn virgin is taken very seriously, and no one can question it if a woman decides to do that. If Elena had just outright refused to marry the man that her parents picked out for her, it would have caused a huge offense to his family and possibly started, like I mentioned, started a blood feud. And that's another big concept that comes into play in this book. Is an Albanian society at the time. Everything was governed by a very complex set of rules about hospitality and how you dealt with your neighbors. And any kind of minor breach of these rules could cause offense. And if the offense was major enough, the only way to rectify it was to actually was for the offended family to actually kill a male member of the family that caused the offense. It didn't have to be the person who caused the offense. It has just any male member would do. But then, of course, that required retribution on the part of that family. They would go back and kill a male member of the first family, and back and forth, and so on and so forth. For, these blood feuds could last decades. They were very hard to end. It required usually negotiation on the part of the women of both families would come together, try to come up with some kind of deal that would allow everyone to save face. And if they could do that, then they had to go back and get their husbands or brothers or sons or fathers to accept the deal to end the feud. And obviously that was something that was very hard to do. So Elena's family was already involved in the blood feud, as it was mentioned in that passage, and she didn't want to cause another one. So the only path available to her was to become a sworn virgin, which, like I said, plays a large role in kind of her story going forward. And of course, at the end of this chapter, she doesn't have any family left, and how she copes with that. If you want to know, you'll just have to read the rest of the book. So next time, for my next reading, I'm going to be starting into book 3 of the trilogy. That'll be the next reading. And until then, just remember to be careful of the shadows.